I want to start with this. So, Rebecca, you spent 20 years as one of the top ranked lawyers, literally battling, negotiating, litigating with narcissists. You have written 3 books on the subject. You have studied this so that you can win. And you have identified that there are 3 different types of narcissists. And for you listening, this is a really important place for us to start because awareness is critical to changing anything for the better. And when you know that there are 3 different types, it's much easier to spot. And then you know what? You're going to be able to stand in your power and use the strategies and not get hooked into this. So, Rebecca, let's talk about the 3 types of narcissists that you've been researching.
Well, the 3 most common ones that you hear about are the covert, grandiose, and malignant. And there's other types of narcissists, and there's even a healthy narcissism as well. But so I want to make sure that I'm clear on that. It's not that those are the only types. Well, let me start with the grandiose, which is the type that I just sort of described, which is the one that everybody normally thinks of as a narcissist. It's the one that's sort of in your face, the one that's, bragging about themselves, the one that is more impulsive. The grandiose is the one that everybody thinks of as a narcissist. I kind of think of it as your garden variety narcissist. And to me, they're the easiest ones to spot. So the covert narcissist is the one that to me, in some ways, is the stealthiest, in some ways is the more dangerous, because they're the ones that are, passive aggressive. They're your humanitarians. They're the oftentimes clergy, oftentimes doctors, lawyers. Everybody thinks they're so nice. Everybody thinks they're so wonderful. Many times they present themselves as victims. Oh my gosh, life isn't fair. And so everybody rushes to take care of them. Or, they're the ones who agree to do things in your face. Oh, yes, of course I'll do that, but then they don't. Or, they take credit for your work. It's like this underlying rage. There's just like right underneath the surface, there's this rage and jealousy that only you sort of see. But everybody else thinks that they're so nice and so wonderful. But you are just constantly subjected to this underlying sort of thing, and you can't really quite put your finger on it, but you just know that there's always sort of this something, these little comments, these little jabs. Oh, what's the name of your book again? I can never quite remember. Or, like things like that. Or, oh, I'm so happy for you. Oh, that's so nice. But when you go to tell somebody about it, it's not quite enough for people to go, oh, okay. Most people think, oh, I'm sure that was inadvertent. Oh, well, she's so nice. I can't imagine that they really meant that. But you just know that taken together as a whole collectively, it's just, you feel like you're going crazy.
Can you give us an example? Give us an example, because you actually dealt with one, because I'm sitting here trying to rack my brain. Okay. Do I know a covert passive-aggressive narcissist? What am I looking for?
Absolutely. So they will start seeding their smearing, for example, in a divorce, maybe 6 months prior. So here's a way that they'll do that. They might start to say, I am so concerned about Johnny and his drinking. I'm just so concerned about him. So they couch their concern in, they're smearing in terms of concern. Just so worried. I'm so worried about him. Like that to a neighbor or to a friend. I'm just so concerned. And so they start this down, early on. And then by the time the divorce actually happens, then, Johnny has a full-blown drinking problem. Well, I've been talking to you about this for months. Well, you'll testify for me against him, in the divorce for custody now, won't you? I mean, I've been telling you for months he's got a drinking problem. Now, he probably has no problem with drinking whatsoever, but they've been laying this foundation about concern and care, and they do it in such a way that is so plausible and so they seem like they're such a good person. They're like little things like an email chain that you get left off of, and all of a sudden you're not in a meeting that you should have been on, and there they are on an important meeting for work, and clients are like, oh, how come you weren't on that meeting? And you're like, well, I didn't get I really thought you were, I don't know how I missed you being on that email chain. I really thought you were on that. Sorry. Taking credit for your work, seeing people on particular interviews and using your own quotes, that very clearly are yours, and, that sort of thing.
Let's go to the third one. So you said there's the grandiose, the covert, passive-aggressive narcissist. What was the third?
Malignant narcissists tend to just be, they're the ones that have no problem just completely ruining your life. This is the one that will honestly just accuse you of being a child molester and you've never touched a child whatsoever. This is the one that will stalk you. They will threaten you. They violence. And by the way, there can be combinations of the types of narcissists as well.
That's kind of scary. Let's keep going. And here's where I want our conversation to go next. One thing that changed my life forever when it comes to narcissism is understanding the origin of narcissism in somebody, because we throw the word around and you may believe that somebody just chooses to be a narcissist. That's not what happens. And Rebecca, you decided to dig into the psychology. And what I love about how you've researched this topic is you thought about it like a lawyer. And lawyers dig into the cases, they dig into the evidence, they dig into the precedent. And you wanted to learn about the psychology of narcissism and where it begins and how it affects somebody's ability to think, how it affects their emotions, because that's critical to you being a badass in the courtroom. And so you dug into the topic of the psychology of a narcissist with the lens of, I got to know how to win. So I got to understand how somebody comes to be like this and how this impacts their emotions and their logic and their thinking, and what you discovered and how you explain it, I think is really cool. So let's go there now. When you were researching the psychology of origin, like how someone becomes narcissistic, and obviously this is a spectrum, what did you discover?
Yeah. So what I found out, and I found this to be really, really fascinating, is that it's a result of trauma. And what happens with the brain when we are exposed to trauma, we have a stress response. What happens to all of us is when we are in stress, it activates our sympathetic nervous system. So we go into fight or flight when that happens. And our brains release hormones, mostly adrenaline and cortisol when that happens. So as children, when that happens, and it happens on a regular basis or a continuous basis, it can actually cause arrested development in the limbic system part of a child's brain, in the part of the brain that is responsible for emotions, for the emotional regulation for a child. And so what happens is, as they grow, while the prefrontal cortex part of their brain can continue to develop, there can actually develop a lag between the prefrontal cortex, which is the reasoning part of the brain, the judgment part of the brain, and the emotional center part of the brain, which is the limbic system part of the brain.
This is why I wanted to have you on the Mel Robbins podcast. And maybe it's because I'm a lawyer. And so I love how you research. But I want to take a highlighter. And I want to highlight this right now for you listening. Because if you've never heard that narcissism is not something someone's born with, it is created in childhood. It is the result of repeated trauma. And what Rebecca is explaining to you, and this piece of it is critical, that the trauma during childhood, emotional neglect, physical abuse, whatever the trauma may be, it causes arrested development in the part of the brain that is responsible for someone's emotions.
Yes.
And what does that
Yes.
mean? That means that while their prefrontal cortex or their thinking part of the brain is like fully functioning, their emotional part of the brain is lagging. That's why somebody who has a narcissistic personality has so little emotional control. I thought I knew what a narcissist was, but I didn't.
A narcissist is not what you think. A narcissist is not a person who thinks so highly of themselves. They will take themselves down to take the other person down. You actually become physiologically addicted to this person